Okay, we're live on Facebook. And then I am now.
We're still in practice mode according to the orange.
Right, thing. So I do that first, and then I'm going to go hit broadcast right now.
Cool.
All right, broadcasting. People should be coming in momentarily. Alrighty, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today on the Chamber's webinar series. My name is PJ Prunty. I'm the President and CEO of the Greater Danbury Chamber of Commerce. So like many of you on this webinar today, the Chamber, over the last several months, we've had to reinvent ourselves to a certain extent and get creative, right, with how we can deliver value to our businesses that are navigating COVID-19. And whether those resources be information that are being made available through federal and state government, putting on webinars like the one we have today, talking with local CEOs, business owners, nonprofit leaders on our new series called Chamber Chat, which provides really an unfiltered conversation with these community members. The term new normal, that's been appearing in what seems like every article, every news story, social media post, you name it, but it's absolutely true, right? We will all, if not currently, be living in a new normal for certainly the foreseeable future, and in some instances, possibly for really years to come. So we are very fortunate to be joined by two individuals who can help you navigate that new normal. And at this time, I'd like to introduce our panelists for this afternoon. First up, we have Filson Thomas. Filson is the president of Archegos Consulting, the Leadership, Excellence, and Development. Filson Thomas believes we are people of value, adding value to people. It was this awareness that enabled Filson to start a leadership and personal growth company, Archegos Consulting, after 20 years in corporate world. Archegos is a Greek word that means pioneer leadership. And Filson started his corporate journey as an IT professional in India. After gaining various experiences in the Middle East and Europe, he built his career in corporate America, in which he led multiple high caliber teams. He also functions as an executive director of the John Maxwell team, the world's top leadership development company. Filson is certified to facilitate, speak, train, and coach individuals and groups in the areas of leadership development, professional skills, and personal growth. He has been utilizing his passion in the business, charity, and faith-based arenas as a counselor and advisor to leaders. Most significantly, Filson has been able to serve as a husband and father to his wife, Renee, and their son. We are also joined by Doug Rawady. Doug is the business development director at Sandler Training. With over 35 years of B2B and B2C sales, marketing and management and customer service experience, Doug is able to objectively assess an organization's problems and deficiencies and typically come up with one or more turnkey solutions that meet those issues head on. His uncommon mix of talent and competency give Doug a unique perspective and advantage that other coach consultants often lack. And his focus on an integrated best practices solution strategy is what truly sets him apart from the pack. He is a certified instructor at Sandler Peak. Doug, it is my honor to give you the floor. Welcome, and thanks for taking time out today.
Well, thank you so much for that nice introduction, PJ. Very much looking forward to this. Our goal here today is to give you some mindset techniques, if you will, some ways in which you can, as we say, navigate the new normal. And as PJ succinctly described it, it could be short-term, long-term, but whatever it is, it'll be different than what we all experienced here over the prior to the onset of COVID. So my segment, which is going to be largely PowerPoint with my narration, but hopefully not your typical bullet point, boring PowerPoint, kind of focuses on the attitude component. Let me cue this up real quick and we'll kind of get the show rolling here. Just bear with me. All right. And let's put this into this. There you go. So the title, Attitude, the little thing that makes a big difference. For those of you who are history buffs out there, you may even be familiar with this. It is actually a slightly tweaked or repurposed Winston Churchill quote. The original quote being, attitude is a little thing that makes a big difference. Well, I think that when you're done with this, my section or my segment rather, and Filson's, you may recognize that actually it is the thing that makes the big difference, because without the right attitude, without the right mindset, not a whole lot of other things are going to fall in line in our lives personally and professionally. Now, most of this is going to be directed towards our professional lives, but there will be a few takeaways you can also use in your personal life. So for those of you on the call, and I'm assuming it's a mix of people, if you've been in business for any length of time, you may be familiar with this gentleman. Zig Ziglar, legendary salesman, motivational speaker, best-selling author, known for a lot of really pithy quotes. And the one on this particular slide, your attitude, not your aptitude, will determine your altitude. Great use of alliteration, by the way. But for Zig, I think the message or the takeaway here is attitude is really kind of the thing that drives everything else. And without the right attitude, then not much else is actually going to happen. So it starts there, and everything from there is either going to be good or bad accordingly. Now, I think we have the chat open, if I'm not mistaken. PJ, do we have chat ability here?
Yes, we do. And I actually just sent a message to the chat feature saying to use this feature when prompted and/or any questions you might have.
So a couple times during this presentation, I'm going to ask you for some feedback just to make it a little bit interactive and solicit opinions, if you will, from those who are in attendance. And I think it'll be kind of fun. So this next slide, I'm not going to caption it at all. But what I'd like you to do in the chat window is maybe just based on nothing more than visual observation, just describe what you think this person's attitude probably is. Just a couple of words, a sentence. Let us know what your take is on the attitude. Now, for what it's worth, I'm not seeing the chat window from Ryan, PJ, so maybe you can just give me any feedback that you're seeing popping up there. So if there's any, there we go. Disgusted, okay, that's a good one. Anybody else? That's probably an app one. Prove it, there you go. Challenging, I think that would be the good takeaway there. Anybody else have any thoughts? If you ran into this person, would you assume he was on his game or maybe having a bad day? All right, well, we'll kind of leave it at that for the moment, but the thing that I want you to think about, those of you who are out there, is think about how you are presenting yourself to the world and recognize that what's going on between your ears can have a very profound impact on how you carry yourself physically. And that actually speaks to this next slide, which is sort of a literal dictionary definition of attitude. Note that the first one speaks to the in between your ears part: manner, disposition, feeling, position regarding a person or thing, tendency, orientation, especially of the mind, negative attitude, group attitude. The second relates to the picture you just saw: position or posture of the body appropriate to or expressive of an action, emotion, etc. A threatening attitude, relaxed attitude. And there's been a lot of study over the years on the mind-body connection, and it's fair to say that if this is how a person carries themselves, it's having a direct impact on what's going on between their ears. And similarly, if you're not having a good day between your ears, you might be exhibiting this kind of body language too. So think about that. Now, in Sandler training, one of the things that we talk about a lot in the various programs is something called the success triangle. Now, this little tiny blue triangle is not the entire triangle. You will see that it is actually comprised of 3 other triangles. The first one being attitude, the next being behavior, and the next being technique. We finally refer to this as the BAT triangle, B-A-T, the acronym for behavior, attitude, and technique. And one of the things that we spend time on throughout this is improving one's batting average, to use a baseball analogy here. See, all of these are important. I'm not gonna say that any one of them is necessarily unimportant to the ultimate goal of success, but many training courses will tend to focus on technique, but without the right behavior and of course attitude, all the technique in the world won't produce the desired outcome, which of course is success, whatever that means to you. And the other kind of interesting way to look at this is that ultimate success is not actually an average of the BAT, it's rather a multiplier. So if you've got a great attitude, wonderful, that's a good place to start, but great attitude by itself will not make up for bad behavior or bad technique. But if you've got great attitude, it can multiply the results of great behavior and technique. So once again, the attitude is kind of the driver of a lot of this. Now, if we take the attitude triangle by itself, you're going to discover that there are components of that as well. So we start out with you at the top of the pyramid, if you will. The next is organization, and the next is the market. Now, with regards to those three things on a day-to-day basis, it's how we perceive ourselves would be the you part of it. The organization, its capabilities, how it functions, the products or services it delivers, and of course the marketplace in which we do business on a day-to-day basis. And probably no huge surprise, but attitude as a whole is generally going to be either positive or negative. And a positive attitude, as you might imagine, it will lead to an outlook of possibility. A negative attitude will tend to be an outlook of limitation. So you're either going to see all the ways to make things happen, or you're going to see all the obstacles that will get in the way of something happening. And the good news here is that you actually can choose which outlook to maintain. It is not something that we are, kind of just subjected to. One of possibility or limitation. That choice, incidentally, has a greater impact on our ability to achieve goals and attain success than almost any other element. And here's why. This is another Sandler graphic. This is called the belief wheel. And it's an illustration of how the beliefs we develop are not only shaped by those outlooks that I just mentioned, but also will reinforce them. So if we look at this thing as if it were a clock face, the beliefs at the 12 o'clock position will cause us to make judgments at 3 o'clock about which actions or non-actions are appropriate and which aren't. That's of course at the 6 o'clock position. And then at 9 o'clock are either the results that we get from the actions and non-action, the outcomes. And those will tend to further fuel the beliefs. So if you can think about this in terms of good positive beliefs and outlooks will tend to be self-fulfilling, so will negative beliefs and outlooks. And this takes us back to the attitude triangle. So think about this, unless, as far as organization and market are concerned, unless you actually own your business or have a high level of responsibility in someone else's company, there's really not a whole lot you can do to influence what goes on there. And pretty much the same can be said, or restrictions apply to whatever market you serve. More often than not, we are at the mercy of conditions beyond our control, and all we have to do is look at the last few months to kind of recognize that the pandemic has dictated what we do more so than our own actions, even though we do have some ability. So that leaves us with the one thing that we do have the ability to actively work on, and of course that is you. And as you might imagine, this can be broken down into three components as well. The first is spirit, the second is body, and the third is mind. Now, I'm not going to spend any amount of time really talking about the body and spirit part. If you're somebody who eats right, gets a lot of sleep, works out, then you probably are very energetic, which of course will have some impact on your attitude. If you are connected to a spiritual channel, and that doesn't mean you've got to go to church necessarily, but if you meditate, you practice spiritual practices, then that too will tend to make you feel good. But at the end of it all, the mind is what really tends to drive those two as well. It's what you focus on, what you think about. And those of us old enough to remember this expression, the mind is a terrible thing to waste. That goes back to 1972. And that was coined, in fact, by a gentleman named Arthur Fletcher, who was at the time the head of the United Negro College Fund. And kind of what it addresses is the fact that we control what goes on between our ears as much as we very often might not want to take responsibility for that. And it comes down to, are you aware consciously and actively controlling those thoughts? Because it's really, really important to remember that thoughts are in fact things. And Napoleon Hill, who I'm sure some of you have heard of, was the person who actually uttered those three words. They were part of the first sentence of this best-selling book, which he published in 1937. And the entire quote goes, "Truly, thoughts are things, and powerful things at that, when they are mixed with definiteness of purpose, persistence, and a burning desire for their translation into riches or other material objects." I will tell you, this is one of the first personal development books I read, and this is going back quite a few years. And I can also say that it made a huge impact on me that still resonates to this day. Another person who was probably equally impacted was a gentleman named Earl Nightingale, who, for those of you who are personal development freaks, may also recognize that name. He was a noted American radio speaker and author back in the 40s, dealing primarily with subjects of human character development, motivation, meaningful existence. And in 1949, he read Think and Grow Rich and was so inspired by it that a few years later, actually in the mid-50s, he wrote and recorded his own book, The Strangest Secret. And in that quote, it's referenced that we become what we think about most of the time. That's the strangest secret. A little side note, that recording, The Strangest Secret, went on to sell more than 1 million copies and was the first gold record for a spoken word recording ever issued. So it was quite an accomplishment in and of itself. Now, going back to chat, I'm going to ask you to offer some opinions on this picture. So the question, has this ever happened to you? And if it did, well, what was going through your mind? Or what do you think is going through the minds of those two people in the car? And I'm not going to say it's never happened to me, but I'm going to ask you to throw in chat just a few comments. What do you think's going on? Okay. Running very late, I see one. Anybody else? You think they're happy? Maybe a little bit perturbed? Okay. Well, I think it's fair to say, based upon road rage. Okay, yeah, that would be a good one. Not a good state to be in, by the way, but a good observation. Yeah, it is. Unfortunately, it's a fairly common experience that we've probably all had once or twice, and maybe observed more often than that. And in the moment when it happens, I think it's fair to say that most people are not consciously thinking about that reaction. And the takeaway from this is that nothing in life has any meaning except the meaning you give it, that any of us gives it. And the meaning in that moment is something that could be radically different than what's actually going on. This quote, by the way, I'll tell you who it's attributed to in a minute. But I want you to think a little bit about cultures. And in some cultures, death, sadly, for example, can be a cause for celebration. Some people are like, hey, this is great, you're on to the next thing. It's an incident in life that has just tremendous joy attached to it. And yet in other cultures, we mourn. I mean, we despair, in fact. But it's the same event. And it's just that people, societies, cultures, individuals have decided to give it a different meaning, which means that we can assign meaning to anything that goes on a daily basis or in the moment. And this quote, by the way, is attributed to this gentleman who's on screen right now in front of these throngs of people, Tony Robbins, best-selling author, public speaker, life coach, philanthropist, has probably impacted the lives of countless hundreds of thousands, millions of people globally since he arrived on the scene quite a few years ago. I actually attended a couple of Tony Robbins programs live, and he's remarkable in his ability to enact change almost instantaneously through a process, through multiple processes. But the whole idea that I think Tony operates on, and that I'd like you to take away from this at the end of all of this, is the ability to live life at cause or at effect. And this little illustration here with the steel balls, if for those of you who are science geeks, you might know that's called Newton's cradle, which is a physical way to demonstrate Newton's law of conservation of momentum and energy. And if you've seen one of these before, you know the way it works is one ball swings in, hits the ones in the middle, and then the one at the other end, as a result of that impact, swings out, it comes back and does the same thing over and over and over again. And it is a perfect illustration of cause and effect. Now, if you're living life at cause, then you tend to be decisive in creating what you want in life, and you take responsibility for what you've achieved or will achieve. You will tend to see the world as a place of opportunity and move towards achieving what you desire. And if you're someone who tends to live at effect, well, it's sort of the opposite, as you may imagine. You may blame others or circumstances for your bad moods or what you haven't achieved for your life in general. You might feel powerless or be dependent on others to feel good about yourself. And if we go back to that road rage incident, fair to say that anybody who's had that experience, by and large, is not living at cause, they're living at effect. And in that moment, it could mean something different if they just took a nanosecond to think about it. And that's what brings us to kind of the gist of this whole thing. There is a psychological technique called cognitive reframing. And it's a process by which situations or thoughts are challenged and then changed. And this can be a real-time process. The mechanism by which this typically is accomplished is through questioning. It's like questioning in the moment. It's taking a nanosecond to question what's going on in your head and arriving at a different meaning. Now, there's two ways that this can be applied. There's what's called content reframing, which means that the content or meaning of a situation is determined by what you choose to focus on. And the questions that you might ask yourself to reframe content would be, what else could this mean? In what way could this be a positive resource? There's plenty others, but you ask the question internally. The other way of reframing is context reframing. Now, in that instance, it's the meaning of something or a situation is determined by changing the setting or circumstances. So context reframe questions could be, well, when else would this behavior be effective, if not right now? And typically that might come in response to, either you're beating yourself up, well, I'm to this or I'm to that, or somebody telling you, well, you're to this or you're to that. So it could be exaggerations, but you need to ask a question to put yourself in a more resourceful state and recognize that our brains will strive to provide answers to any questions we ask relentlessly and repeatedly. So if you don't like the answer you're getting when you ask a question, then ask a better question. Now, a great example of this, I've got a short video clip here I'm going to run, and the individual who's being interviewed here, many of you may be familiar with. He is a best-selling author. I'm sure Filson is aware of this person because he's also an acknowledged authority in the area of leadership. This is from a couple of years ago, but I'm just going to say you may want to turn your personal computers up a little bit to hear it better.
What does it mean to perform under pressure in the work that you do?
Performing under pressure, whether it's me or anybody else, is the same. I have the same pressures as anyone else. There's time, there's performance, there's financial. I mean, there's deadlines. My pressures are not unique. The situations may be different, but everybody has the same kinds of pressures. But what I found, or what I find fascinating, is the interpretation of the stimuli. Let me explain. So I was watching the Olympics, this last Summer Olympics, and I was amazed at how bad the questions were that the reporters would ask all the athletes. And almost always, they asked the same question, whether they were about to compete or after they competed. Were you nervous, right? And to a T, all the athletes went, no, right? And what I realized is it's not that they're not nervous, it's their interpretation of what's happening in their bodies. I mean, what happens when you're nervous, right? Your heart rate starts to go, you sort of get a little tense, you get a little sweaty, right? You have expectation of what's coming, and we interpret that as, I'm nervous. Now, what's the interpretation of excited? Your heart rate starts to go, you're anticipating what's coming, right? You get a little sort of like tense. It's all the same thing. It's the same stimuli, except these athletes, these Olympic quality athletes have learned to interpret the stimuli that the rest of us would say as nervous as excited. They all say the same thing. No, I'm not nervous. I'm excited. And so I've actually practiced it just to tell myself when I start to get nervous that this is excitement. Yeah. And so I used to speak in front of a large audience and somebody would say, how do you feel? I used to say, a little nervous. Now when somebody says, how do you feel? I'm like, really excited, actually. And it came from just sort of telling myself, no, this is excitement. And it becomes a little bit automatic later on. But it's kind of a remarkable thing to deal with pressure by interpreting what your body is experiencing as excitement rather than nerves. And it's really kind of effective. It makes you want to rush forwards rather than pull back, and yet it's the same experience.
It makes you want to rush forward instead of pull back. And yet it's the same experience. It's the same sensations. But in that clip, Simon Sinek has created a different meaning to those sensations, which is an empowering meaning, which of course is an attitudinal adjustment, simply based upon the questions or the interpretations he chose to have. So in this instance, I'm going to just run a few off here. So think about questions as they may pertain to changing content or context. So what's positive about this situation? And the situation can be anything. What's positive about the pandemic? Well, the knee-jerk reaction, the road rage reaction might be nothing. This sucks. Okay, not going to say it's great, but that does not lead towards a resourceful state. So the next question might be, well, what could be positive? Which causes your mind to have to search for a better answer. And you keep asking the question until you come up with a good answer. And then the response is, how does that make me feel? Well, the better answer will typically make you feel better. Another question, what might be useful about going through this experience? Again, apply it to your experience of choice. Right now, pandemic, what's useful? Well, you got time to learn new things. Not a bad thing when you think about it, because when else would you have time? How else might I interpret the meaning of this event, a particular event? In what context could this behavior be appropriate, if not the current one? In what context could this behavior be useful, if not the current one? And lastly, in what context could this behavior potentially serve me better than it does right now? And I will invite you to jot. You don't need to put this in chat. I want to be respectful of the time, so I don't want to get too far into Filson's presentation, but think about these types of questions and jot a few of them down that you might be able to call on when you're finding your attitude needs a little bit of tweaking. Maybe you're not operating from a resourceful state and the attitude is not the one you want or need to move forward. So kind of in closing, I'm going to go back to the success triangle. Success, whatever that means to you, whether it's personal or professional, it's comprised of attitude, behavior, and technique. And without a good attitude, the behavior and the technique will not by themselves get you to where you want to go. So think about the first and the most important thing to focus on here is getting your attitude in alignment, and that is a big part of the whole mindset shift that we need for navigating the new normal. With that, I'll be happy to turn this back over to my colleague, Mr. Filson, who's going to talk about leadership, which is equally important. Filson, take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Doug. That was beautiful. It's a great insight on attitude. And I just want you to know, when I look at my sweaty palms, it's just heat and excitement. All right. It's not nervousness at all. So
I love it. I love it. It's great.
So absolutely great to be here. So great presentation. It's a beautiful overview on attitude. And I was taking my notes down here, how you were just breaking it down. And I can see how it's a complete presentation that's coming today. So first of all, PJ, thank you very much for this opportunity, for organizing this. Sincerely appreciate. And also Doug and Sandler, thank you for this partnership. I'm honored to be here with you all. You know, even as we going through this time of crisis, I believe perspective matters. Perspective matters. Perspective is how we view things is how we do things. And for a given scenario, in any situation, if someone looks at it negatively, their action will be negative. But someone looks at it positively, their action is negative or positive. So perspective matters. So my presentation will be built around that with the attitude, how our perspective matters. You know, folks, I sincerely believe in 2 years, in 5 years, or 10 years down the road, we will be in a much better place. I'm convinced with everything within me that the best days are definitely ahead of me. I don't know when, but definitely it's ahead of me. Having said that, I think our ability to get there and to be relevant when we get there depends on how we are willing to adapt to the change. And we will get there, but we have to be more relevant and we have to move with the change. And just like PJ in his introduction said, normal is behind us. We don't know what is that normal. Normal has changed forever, right? That term, new normal. And even in the time of new normal, it's very important. If in this time of crisis, there's nobody who can say with certainty what's going to look like. If you ever see a leader come and say with certainty what the future is going to look like, I advise you run from them. Because at this point of time, nobody has certainty. But then the leaders don't have certainty, they have clarity. Now, as we lead ourselves, as we lead people in our team, we cannot guarantee certainty, but we can guarantee clarity. The clarity defines what will be my next steps. What are my immediate next steps? I'm going to try a few things. I cannot be certain, I cannot guarantee it will be successful, but I'm not going to stay there. And see, that's where it just comes to us, as during intro, PJ said, the nature of our business, we are in the business of adding value to people. We say we are the people of value, adding value to people. So anybody asks me, what do you do? I add value to people. I also happen to do leadership training and coaching. But once we understand the whole purpose is to add value, so I look for the ways, how can I add value to people? And that's where, and in this time, and I don't know how it's going to look like in the future, but what I know is next 15 days, next sometime, 75 days, what I'm going to do, I have a plan. And that's how I move forward. You see, one thing about the crisis is that crisis reveals players from the pretenders. Because pretenders can hide under the title, position, and all these things, but they are squeezed and they don't know what to do right now. You see, players immediately go where the need of the people are. And they go on to reach them. But the pretenders, in the meantime, they're trying to hide and they're trying to make themselves look good. Pretenders are all about how I am positioned, right? But in the meantime, you got your players are all about people. So even in this time of crisis, or what the new normal we're talking about, it is very important that we go to people where they are, right? We go where the people are and we find them, and then we just influence them and we lead them and help them. You see, even as we're talking about navigating through new normal, this is a time where people are really looking to see who is legit, who genuinely cares for me, and who does not. You know, there's this thing which I've learned when you talk about any followers. You know, when I say followers, that's like anyone. It can be your client, it can be your family members, it can be your community members, people whom you have influence on. So if you are someone looking to do a selling, and that's your, whomever you influence, that's your follower, right? So all followers have got 3 questions they ask their leader. Number 1, can I trust you? Number 2, can you help me? Number 3, do you care for me? You see, these 3 questions, universally, everyone's asking. So even if you go on a networking event, if you're sitting at the networking event, you're talking to people, there's the people you're networking with, they have these 3 questions. Do you care for me? Can I trust you? Can you help me? And at this point of time, because of that, you can easily see pretenders. They just stand out, because players, in the meantime, they come out, trying to help. So in your profession, in your career, wherever you are, that makes a big difference. Because pretenders, you see, they have an agenda. And the agenda is, how can I look good? Players is all about, how do I go find people and help them? You know, you see, players, they want the ball in the time of crisis. You know, players, they want the ball in the time of crisis. They want to go and they want to shoot the ball. Pretenders, they like to stand on the sideline, right? They want to pass the ball so that they can be visible enough, but they don't want to take the shot. John Wooden, who was a UCLA coach, infamous coach, amazing person. If you haven't followed John Wooden and some of his teachings, it's mind-blowing. I would encourage to do that. Now, John Wooden, he was talking about, he said that I don't like to pick a captain of the team at least 2 or 3 games into the tournament or season. He said, because I want to see in those 2-3 games into the season, who's the player who's saying, I want the ball, especially when the scores are tied and 1 minute is left. Who really wants the ball? Because that's where your captain is. That's the player. And that's how we identify. So this crisis is a revealer. Crisis is time where it just reveals people of who you are. Doug was bringing together he was defining the whole need to have the right attitude. He was defining why it is important that even through this crisis, we move with the right frame of mind. There is one comment that people generally say that people are made in crisis. I don't know if you have heard that. I've heard that a lot. But I want to say people are not made in crisis. People are revealed in crisis. You see, when you squeeze lemon juice comes out. When you squeeze orange juice comes out. And these are the times people are being squeezed. And when they're squeezed, whatever is inside is coming out. So crisis does not make us. By the way, choices makes us. The choices we take, that's what makes us. But crisis does not make us. But we have control over our choices. And what we do with those choices, that's what makes or defines us. And what I want to bring is, even in this crisis, to navigate through, I just want to present 3 points, all right? And I know we have a limitation of time, so I hope you will listen a little fast. I don't think you're listening fast enough right now, so I hope you'll cooperate with me there, right? So, number 1, crisis requires you to focus. Crisis requires you to focus. Doug, in his presentation, was talking about the spirit, body, and mind. And he said you want to focus on the mind because mind is all about what you focus on. And that's beautiful message. That's it. Because crisis requires you to focus. Because what you focus on expands. So anything that you you see, even in the troubles, if you look at the business people, successful people, in the crisis, when the times are down, they become more successful because it comes to what they are focusing on. So what do you focus on? So focus on what is before you and not what is behind you. So you put behind everything that you cannot do, things that are not within your control. You put that behind you. The way the quarantine is going on, the government regulations are, and the whatever travel ban or whatever limitations we have, these are the things which not in our control. So what do? We put that behind us. So, and then we put before us all that we are within our limits, that we are capable to do. So all our difficulties, limitations we put behind, and we focus on what's before us. Talking to different organizations right now, different leaders, and just having this conversation, one of the statements that everyone comes is, my budget, my plan, my forecast, everything is gone south. It's just screwed up, completely screwed up. And they're looking at the analysis. They compare that year over year or beginning of the year analysis, and everyone are in deficit. Obviously, it will be in deficit. But this is a time where we have to make that switch. And my recommendation to them is, I think, in the beginning of the year, you made the plan. You just have to scrap that plan. You just have to scrap it out. Because those plans are not relevant anymore. Suddenly, everything got changed. So what do you do then? Make a 75-day plan. Starting today, for next 75 days, I don't think we can make a 90-day plan. 75 is also seems to be a stretch. But make a 75-day plan and say, okay, where will we be? Next 75 days, what will we do? And it's interesting, Doug spoke about Simon Sinek, and I was listening to Simon yesterday, and he was talking about the whole comparison statement we're talking about. At this point of time, we just have to make certain plan and move forward, and we really cannot guarantee results. We cannot guarantee certainty. So just put together a plan, immediate plan for next 75 days plan, and move forward. And let me assure you, for your clients, for your business, for your whatever realm of influence, as you start building that plan, you will start seeing clarity and things will start shaping up. So, number 1, crisis requires you to focus. My point number 2 is crisis requires adaptability. Crisis requires adaptability. Crisis requires us to be adaptable. You see, crisis usually is a case study. It's a case study in uncertainty. It is true that coronavirus is there and no one knows how long it will last and how bad it will be. And we are right now seriously fighting a crisis within a crisis right now. And in fact, I just spent most of my time last week calling all my friends and business colleagues and business clients, especially from the African American clients. And I will be talking to them, and I just been on phone with them for an hour or more. And my conversation with them was, I don't want to say that I understand, but will you please help me understand what's going on? Because I want to get into there. I want to really understand. And it was very, it was an very enlightening conversation, and which enables me to do a few things and look into what the right approach is and that have a right mindset as I proceed. But then coming back to the point, one of the things everyone's realizing and acknowledging is we are in a terrible times and the crisis and within the crisis. And it's very hard to contain for many people, right? But then there are a few things that we cannot control at this point of time. So with what we know, it's calling us to be adaptable. You know, in the world of sports, which we all are craving for right now for a bit, all good coaches have a pre-game plan. They have a pre-game plan. They say what we want to do, how it's going to look like, and all these things. However, once a game starts, all games may not go according to the plan. So when all good coaches have got pre-game plan, the great coaches, they have a mid-game plan. They get together in a huddle and they say, all right, this is how we planned it, but that's not what happened. This is our current reality. And now within this current reality, what can we do to get to our goal, right? And they are changing their goal at that point of time. What do we do to get to that place, to be successful? And so they build that plan B and move forward. So some people have got plan B, some have plan C, plan D. They just make the plan because they are not emotionally attached to their original plan. And if you're someone who is still looking into your plan that you created ahead in the beginning of the year, I just want to say, sorry, you're emotionally attached to the plan and that's not going to help you. So what do? Let's come back and see what can I do for next 75 days. So we have to be adaptable. See, there is a profound difference between conformity and adaptability. There are these two words, conformity and adaptability. Because conformity is a negative quality. It is about blending in. It's about if a person conform to something, to be honest with you, they don't want to be rejected. That's why they conform to things. So they just blend into the crowd. We see a lot of people who are just conforming to what's happening around us and they just join that. But what we call here right now is not to conform, but to be adaptable. And adaptability in meantime is a positive quality. And it is adjusting. It's not our weakness, but we are operating on our strength. And while we're operating on our strength, we are adjusting to succeed. It is adjusting to make changes that will help you get better. And that's what the adaptability is all about. This great American golfer, I don't know if you're a golf fan, you would have heard of Tom Watson. Tom Watson was in 1970s and 80s. He was one of the top golfer. In fact, he is to date one of the top 10 golfers of all times. He has won like 8 major PGA championship and was heading the PGA money list for 5 times. You know, he's a great golfer. Now, Tom Watson, he once said, like, you know, when he said of all his career in his lifetime, there had been only 5 tournaments where when he held the golf club in the first game, he made his swing, hit the first swing. He knew he was going to win. He knew that swing was perfect. The golf club was sitting perfectly in his hand, and he knew he was on his way to win. He said, but in every other games or tournaments that he played, after the second round or third round, he had to go to the driving range and he had to adapt his swing. He had to work it out so that he gets the swing right. And Tom says, in all other tournaments, I had to adjust my way to victory. You see, almost all of his victory in the tournament, it's not because he had his swing perfect, but he had to adjust his way to victory. And that's what made him in the top 10 golfers ever. Friends, we have to adapt with the place we are in, with the times we are in. We are in crisis. Things not happening the way we wanted to, but we can adapt. Good news is we can adjust, we can adapt, and we can move our way to victory. So point number one was crisis requires us to focus. Crisis requires adaptability. And my third point, which I believe is the most important point in everything that I said, Doug laid this foundation of attitude. I think that's very huge. That's important. And as you're building, and this point, the third point, crisis requires you to be intentional. Crisis requires you to be intentional. You see, growth is not an automatic process. If you're going to grow, you have to grow on purpose. And growth is the only guarantee that tomorrow is going to be better. Because what brought us here will never take us there. The level of awareness brought us here is not going to take us to the next level. So that's the only thing that will guarantee. And the road to success is always intentional. I learned it very hard way when I started my journey. And actually my mentor, John Maxwell, he asked a question. He said, like, do you have a personal growth plan and of your intentional growth? And I'm like, I started thinking, do I really have a personal growth plan? And to be honest, I don't have a personal growth plan. And since then, I've asked many people, do you have a personal growth plan? And they don't have a personal growth plan. You see, I was working hard in my job. I was working hard and I was trying to building my career, but I was not working on me. And once you grow, your opportunities grow. And your preparation always meets the opportunity. Once the opportunity knocks the door, it's too late to prepare. So it's important that we grow. Think about it. In our school system, the way it's defined from pre-K to college, the institution or system tells us what to study, what to do. But once we are done, many people don't have growth. You know, I growing up as a child, I used to go and do whatever I did, and it always seemed that growth was an automatic process. I would go to school, I would come back, eat food, and things to be like, it was an automatic. I'm growing. Now that I'm old, I realize that only thing that grows automatic is my stomach. For everything else, I have to be intentional, right? For everything else, I have to be intentional. So that plays a huge role. So we have to grow. And personal growth is not a natural process. So what I would like to really challenge you right now, write down this question. And this question is, right now, what will you like to improve about yourself? What would you like to improve about yourself? Don't list dozens of things. Just list one item which is on your area of your strength. That is your talent, your gifting that you want to develop. And write one item in the area of your choice. That could be a discipline. It could be punctuality or whatever it is, the area of choice that you want to develop. Write down what is one area on your strength and on the area of your choice that you would like to develop. And everything gets better once you get better. I know my time's running out, but let me just bring it out. There are a few things that stops us from growing. And I just want to quickly comment on few gaps that hinders us from growing as we wrap up. First of all, the biggest gap that we all have is a gap between knowing and doing. The gap between knowing and doing. We all know so much. We've been going through different workshops, different seminars. Oh, we learn. And from that time, childhood, we've been learning a lot. We know so much, right? But then, many times, we are great. When it happens to somebody else, we are there. We have so much to tell them what they can do, how they can help better, right? But when it comes to us, it's challenge. So the biggest gap is a gap of knowing and doing. But then when you look at different other gaps, one of the big gap I call is what is called as mistake gap. Mistake gap says, I'm afraid to make mistake. Hey, if it was in a room, I would have asked, like, how many of you have ever not done something because you were scared to do it, right? I was afraid that I was going to fail, right? PJ, I always put the hand, the legs, everything up there, right? Because there's so many things we want to do certain things, but we do not do it because we are afraid to make mistakes. But you know what? That's your starting point. You grow into it. You work your way through that. And one thing that holds us back from making mistakes is what we call as fear. And fear always holds us back from making mistake. And I've heard a lot of motivational speakers come and say, you have to overcome fear, you have to beat fear to death and all these things. You know, I don't know. Personally, I haven't overcome fear. I don't know what it means to overcome fear. Because even right now, when I was about to start, my hands were sweating with excitement, right? So I still don't know how to overcome fear. But then this is what I believe. I believe that we have two emotions. I have a negative emotion called fear and positive emotion called faith. And at any given point of time, that emotion that's dominant, that's how I respond. If my faith is dominant, I move forward. And if my fear is dominant, I move backward. And by the way, presence of faith does not mean absence of fear. Just because I have faith to actually do this program and move forward does not mean there's an absence of fear. But then I did not allow my fear to dominate my faith. And that's where it allows me to go forward. So one thing we can do is overcome fear. So mistakes holds up fear is what holds up. Feed yourself with positivity. Connect with the right people who can help you grow. And that will take us to the next level. The second gap of that holds us back from being intentional is what I call as comparison gap. Comparison gap is where you're comparing yourself with someone else. It's a very bad place to be in. Because if I compare myself with Doug or PJ, there are only two answers. One, I may feel I'm better than them. And if I'm feeling better than them, that is pride. That's a very negative emotion. The second thing is I may feel I'm inferior than them. That's again negative. But it's not just negative, but what that also means is I put a benchmark on how far I want to grow. Because my possibilities are limitless. So I don't want to limit up to where someone else is when the person I'm comparing with. So what do you compare in that case? You always compare with yourself. How was I 6 months ago? And in that 6 months, how much have I changed? And that's the comparison you do it. So as you do that, and with all that I said, I just want you to know, if you can take this message to be intentional, if you can be intentional in your personal growth, that's the only thing that will guarantee your success. Friends, what I want from you now in this time is not to do more than just survive. I know that's what PJ wants, that's what Sandler Training and Doug wants, and that's why we all are here. You will survive. There's no two ifs or questions about it. You will survive. But we are thinking, if it might, but we want you to thrive. It might be too far off, but what our deepest desire is, we want to see you thrive. You know, I want you to, and we want you to do well for yourself. We want to see you do well for your family. We want to see you do well for your community. And I want it to be like time where we all are growing together. Time for you to realize that you can be better, because big people get bigger during the difficult times. So thank you all. And Doug, great presentation. Back to you, my brother.
Thank you, sir. And I likewise applaud you for your presentation. Very well done. Lots of great points, and I hope that our attendees were taking copious notes. And PJ, this you did say this will be available to be watched again, recorded, or?
Yes, yeah, we have recorded it. We're also on Facebook, so we can use that to disseminate as well. In the chat box, I included both Filson and Doug's contact information. Should anyone want to reach out to them and connect with them offline to discuss further.
Yep.
Guys, I just want to once again say thank you all for being here. Thank you for allowing us to add value to you.
Yes.
This is what our passion is, and this is what it's all about. And I just want you to know, do not limit based on what you're seeing around yourself. And thanks, PJ, for sharing that info. And if there is any ways that we can be of any help or assistance, please do not hesitate. We are here to serve you.
I think it's fair to say, and I'm sure I've been speaking for Filson as well, is that what we discussed today just really scratches the surface. There's a lot of information, a lot of content that respective organizations can provide. And hey, call, email if you have any questions. We're both certainly very happy to engage in discussion, and wherever it goes, well, we'll see what happens. But likewise, thank you all for being in attendance. Appreciate it.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thanks again, Filson, Doug. Appreciate all your insights and advice. We greatly appreciate it. We have a week full of additional chamber chats and webinars that are coming up this week. So stay tuned. Best way to stay up to date on that stuff is through our constant contact, our newsletter. I wanted to give a quick shout out to Amelia Anderson from the Chamber office. She's our membership and communications director, who's working to help get that information out to all of our members and our businesses. So thanks again, Doug and Filson. Appreciate your time and your important insight and advice. And everyone who joined us via the webinar, thanks for carving time out of your busy days. We're here for you. Send us any email suggestions as to what you'd like to see, because we want to continue with this communication method. So thanks again. Hope everyone stays safe and stays healthy.
Likewise.
Thank you all. Thank you, PJ.
Great afternoon.
Thank you, everyone.
Take care.